speaking about Yosef Burg, whom I met in 2001 for the first time. Born in Viznitz in 1912, died in 2009. The first professional writing that he did was in the Chernivtsi Blätter, a Yiddish newspaper which in 1934 was banned by the Romanian government. He was a teacher in Vienna, survived the Holocaust, lost most of his family. And in 1990, he revived the Chernivtsi Blätter newspaper as a monthly publication. So who am I and how do our paths cross? I was born in Chernivtsi after the war. The family left when I was just 4 months old. Early childhood in Romania, then in Israel from the age of 6 to 10, then grew up in Montreal, Canada. I'm a historian as well. East European Jewish history is my specialty. But I wanted to speak with you about Montreal. Montreal, Canada, since around 1900, received a significant immigration of Jews from the Tsarist Empire and another wave of post-World War II Jews, immigrants largely from Ukrainian lands and Holocaust survivors. One of the consequences of these Jewish immigration waves was a very lively Yiddish literary scene in Montreal, described by scholars as second in North America only to the one that flourished in New York City. This includes the establishment in 1912 of the Yiddish Volksbibliothek, the Jewish public library, which was where I went in my earlier years to experience Jewish books. I did not go to Jewish schools, but that was my center. It was established by several people, in particular by a person whose name I'm sure is familiar to many of you, the prominent Jewish writer and literary critic Reuben Breinen, also editor of the Montreal Yiddish newspaper, Der Kanadier Adler. And there were a host of other Yiddish writers in the 1920s and 1930s whose works I got to know because I was an appraiser for the National Archives of Canada of Yiddish works. And in this case, it was a large collection of the library, the private library of Sholem Stern and a number of other authors. When they passed away, their libraries either went to the Jewish Public Library or to the National Archives. Then, among those who came, among the Yiddish writers who came to Montreal as Holocaust survivors in the late 1940s, some are of world renown as well. I'm sure some of you have heard of Chava Rosenfarb, the poetess Rachel Korn, Yehuda Elberg, all of whose writings reflect the Churban, their wartime experiences, and the impact of the Holocaust. Oddly enough, though I'm much younger than they are, I ended up being a professor in Montreal, and Yehuda Elberg was my student. I learned a great deal from him. Why am I telling you all this? The Volksbibliothek in Montreal, as I said, was part of my scene. And how does my path cross with Yosef Burg? In 2001, I was about to travel to Chernivtsi on a project to digitally record the matzevot in the impressive, large Jewish cemetery of Chernivtsi. That is a story unto itself for another time. 2001 would be my very first return to Chernivtsi since I was an infant, to what, in my mind, was a mythical place that I would from time to time locate on world maps. Before embarking on this return journey, I did a little homework and was given the advice that one of the people that I should meet in Chernivtsi was Yosef Burg, not to be confused with the Israeli politician Yosef Burg. At the Jewish Public Library, I looked for his books. What I found were 6 tapes in what in the 1990s was a program launched by the Jewish Public Library called Living Books. There were many Yiddish speakers at the time still in Montreal, and they would record works of various writers, and these would be loaned out. And this is how I was introduced to Burg's writings. Then I found myself in Chernivtsi and visited with Yosef Burg, and he gave me a wonderful long interview. And many things happened also on this journey, which I told my husband Beryl about, and he bought a plane ticket, and he was with me for 1 week of the 6 weeks that I was here. And we had several other long conversations, all videotaped, and I will share with you some excerpts from these. I probably have about 5 hours of interviews. You'll hear about 7 minutes of them. He spoke at length about his early years, his father's ambitions that he become a Rav, his own inclinations towards secular Yiddishist culture, and his aspirations to be a writer. He described his experience as a 12-year-old at a Yiddishist summer camp run by Eliezer Steinberg. And he described his encounters with this figure who was so important to him at the time. And one of the things that stuck in my mind is what advice Steinberg gave him. Ei, Jüngerle, a Schreiber ist schwer zu sein, aber ein lattischer Mensch darf man sein. And with a laugh, he said to me, I became a little bit of a writer, but a lattischer Mensch weiß ich nicht. That was, and this characteristic laugh you will see on the tapes. He spoke about how in the 1990s he was dedicated to reviving the literary publication Der Chernivtsi Blätter, which was closed by the Soviets in the 1930s, in which he, as a young writer, had contributed his first literary work, which was the Offensplav. He also spoke about Yiddish, which he said many people regarded as a jargon, a mix of several languages. And now a certain German professor, familiar with Yiddish, countered this negative assessment with a statement, Yiddish is a loshon le'atzmoi. Yiddish is a language unto itself, unique, like no other. Yosef Burg presented me with this little book, Zwei Welten, which he inscribed. This is a collection of short stories, essays, vignettes, published in 1997. If I were to give a full-length lecture, I might have tried to prepare a deeper textual analysis of this and other of his writings. But I won't be doing that. But before viewing the video, I will limit myself to sharing with you some thoughts and impressions. I was very impressed by the vivid descriptions of both natural environment, of nature and urban streets, and individual people, whom, because of reading what he wrote and the way he framed his wording, I could visually imagine, and that made an impression. He evokes a world that he witnessed, rather than just telling stories. There are recurring motifs, ideas, not surprisingly, about the Holocaust, as he lost most of his family during the war. So the Holocaust looms large in many of these stories. The past, flashbacks, feelings of nostalgia, being in a hazy, dreamlike state, echoes, as captured in his 1990 essay, A verspätete Ecke, Stillkeit, Ellenkeit, stillness, loneliness, melancholy, timelessness, verloren dem Cheshbon von Zeit. People who once inhabited these spaces are in his stories. People whom he knew. He sees their faces, he hears their voices, and that may explain why it's conveyable to the reader in the way I experienced it. The connection between memory and pen, the notion of hemshech, continuity, which is how he explained his own dedication to reviving the Chernivtsi Blätter in 1990s. At the risk of oversimplifying, I would like to expand on one theme, the theme of Zwei Welten, two worlds, which Burg actually chose as the title of this little book and one of the leading essays in it. This notion of two worlds, I believe, says a great deal about how he saw his own life and the world in post-war Chernivtsi. First of all, there's the before and the after relating to the Holocaust and the Soviet suppression of Jewish culture. The contrast between the world of great literary, cultural creativity of pre-war Chernivtsi Jewry, in particular the world of Yiddish writers, publishers, and readers, very importantly, the readers, and the negligible remnant that remained, and its distancing, it's almost being devoid of Jewish culture, which happened in the course of the post-war Soviet times, and by the time that he was describing who was, as you will see in the video, what's left of it in Chernivtsi in 2001. Then there's the duality of life of the spirit and harsh reality. The essay, which bears the name Zwei Welten, juxtaposes Holocaust victims who are pious Jews, whose faith gives them surprising inner strength and enables them to face death with dignity in the face of Nazi brutality. In the story, or vignette, which some of you may know, of the woodcutter's heirloom axe, the pious Jew, whose prayers are interrupted by two Nazi officers, finds both the quickness of wit and the physical strength to overcome their murderous intent. I will conclude with a quote which captures the themes that I just described in Yiddish. It's a description of dawn, the breaking of day. Es hat ungeheuben Tag. Sterne haben sich geloschen und verschwunden, wie ausgelöschte menschliche Lebens. Ich habe sich eingeguckt in dem ausgesternen Cholal. Mir hat sich gedacht, als ich trug in sich an eigenem Himmel, my own skies, a behaltenes für sich allein. And in this I see, and it concludes, warmer und treuriger in ein Zeit. In this I see some of his own life, the way he separated the capacity to try to do the hemshech and the continuity, and his rather strong ties to the Soviet regime during those years. So on that note, I conclude, and I welcome any questions before we show the video. Thank you.